What are you shooting for? This is what Grayson asks Caitlyn after the competition that they have in Caitlyn's flashback. Grayson does it to protect the people and be of service to the city. But why does Caitlyn do it? In the first scene of the episode, we see a flashback of Caitlyn and Grayson in a competition. This flashback scene is not silent, and is not Caitlyn's lowest point, but it is a point in her life that means something to her. I think this hints a little more as to why she became an enforcer here. It's very likely that Grayson's death triggered Caitlyn in some way to want to become an enforcer, perhaps to find out who killed her and get revenge. And though this scene is not silent, like Vi, Powder and Jayce's, it puts emphasis on Caitlyn and asks the question why she trains with the gun. One which we as the audience want to listen and look for the answer. I think this also denotes the point in which she becomes one of the main characters of the show. The scene does not need to make us emphasise with Caitlyn, unlike the others for Jayce and Vi and Powder. The show has already done that by showing us her relationship with Jayce, and her being the one who found Vi for us. It still wants the scene to put emphasis on her, to almost elevate her in our minds to status of main character, but does not need to show us her lowest point. In the last episode, we found out that she became an enforcer and had a disagreement with her parents. She also appears to have an obsession with finding out who this crime boss is in the Undercity. And this scene gives us hints towards that, but more importantly, a look at who Caitlyn is as a character. Again, what are you shooting for? This scene may not show us her at her lowest point, but like with the others, it shows us the scene that defines her as a character. Vi expects to be beaten here. You can tell from the dialogue here that this is her world and she has accepted it. She expects the world to come at her and doesn't trust it. She doesn't trust anyone and she doesn't feel safe anywhere. And in particular in this scene, she does not trust Caitlyn. Caitlyn as well can't trust Vi at this moment. We know she can't because they haven't had enough time together. They barely know each other, and Vi, for all she knows, is a criminal. However, we were just given the reason, or at least the hint to the reason for why she releases Vi. An obsession with catching Silco, or perhaps wanting so badly to prove that she isn't just a counsellor's daughter. Enough of one that she'll take the risk of trusting someone she doesn't even know. She even walks over the red line in this scene, and doesn't back down as Vi runs up to the bars, really showing just how much she wants this, how much she is willing to risk to get what she wants here. Marcus is such a complex yet realistic character. I'll speak about him more later in the episode, but we can see here how conflicted he feels, just having given the sermon for the dead enforcers, of which he feels responsible, not just for being the enforcer chief, but for being in Silco's pocket. He clearly respected Grayson, the responsibility of her death weighing on him, and by the expression on his face here, he doesn't feel like he lives up to her memory. Grayson asks Caitlyn in the flashback what she is shooting for, and I feel like what Marcus is shooting for is holding on to his hand right here. Another thing I love here is the placement of this scene within the story. Grayson was a relatively minor character, and yet there are so many events happening due to her death. Powder may be the main cause of the issues in Arcane, but Silco's influence on the events in Piltover and the Undercity are not minor. Jinx appears to hesitate before activating the device here. The scene going to Milo, which, as we discussed in the last episode, is negative reinforcement in her mind. The last time that we know of that she used these crystals, she ended up killing her family. I could easily understand her not wanting to even attempt this, and I'm actually a little surprised that she didn't hesitate for longer here, but perhaps her need for not being abandoned again is overpowering whatever PTSD-like symptoms she might have been feeling in that moment. Though we can clearly see the moment she activates the device, all of the memories come rushing back. We can see the bunny representing Vi, and when she says no, it was a mistake, this is the Powder from the past talking. The post-traumatic stress just bringing back all of these memories and putting her back into that time and place that she was as a child when everything went wrong. I love how this scene shows how different Caitlyn and Vi are as people. Vi is parkouring through the streets, running as fast as she can. The music again emphasizing what she is feeling, which is freedom. After being cooped up in a prison for, we don't know how many years, she is finally free. Something which she probably never thought she would actually ever see again. While Caitlyn is shown as being scared and timid as she slowly climbs down, but even so, she is still courageous enough to follow Vi. It seems like Caitlyn wants to bring something back to show she is not just a counsellor's daughter, or to find Silco. However, this world is unknown. She feels Vi can offer her what she wants, but it's still scary to travel into the unknown, but she does it anyway. So I feel like this scene shows a lot for both of their characters in just both really great and interesting ways. And another little thing I really love about this scene is how once Caitlyn finally gets to the bottom, we see the old man walking past the alleyway. The same old man that we saw just about to get on the tram that Caitlyn was about to get up to. And considering how slow he's walking, it probably took Caitlyn a significant amount of time to actually climb down. Jinx ran away from her failed experiment, still not having confronted what happened all those years ago. So it's pretty important for her that she goes back to the place of her childhood and confronts them. And that's what she's doing here in this scene. When she fights the machine here, she's symbolically fighting all of the memories of Vi, both the good and the bad ones, anything that's causing conflict within her, screaming and crying like she did as a child, though she is not destroying anything but trying to reach something, to see if she as an adult is as strong as Vi was in her memories. And that's why she's looking up at the board here, and that's why she also gets annoyed when her score doesn't beat Vi's. This, along with the food scene from earlier, emphasised the differences between Vi and Caitlyn, and the different ways that they see the world, and showing that they're on very different journeys. Caitlyn can't understand why Vi is eating this food. I mean, I'm pretty sure we as the audience can't understand why Vi is eating this food. Yet she doesn't know what it was like for Vi trapped in prison. And she has no memories of the food Vi used to eat as a child, which I'm sure we all look fondly on the food that we used to eat as a child, no matter how good or bad it might have been. And then we see the bar. All Caitlyn sees is a den for criminals, whereas this used to be the home for Vi. She remembers how her and her family used to hang out in the basement, the same room which Caitlyn says probably has bodies inside, which understandably makes Vi angry. Marcus still has the coin from Act 1, a reminder of what happened and a symbol showing that he cannot let go of it, that he is still struggling with what happened, an apt theme for this episode considering Jinx is going through something similar. This struggle is shown pretty clearly when Silco hands Marcus the grenade, and he imagines sacrificing himself to kill Silco. I think this is a good time to talk about Marcus. In episode 3, I mentioned that I didn't get his dialogue in the scene where he captures Vi, and I still think the scene was changed, making the dialogue not quite fit, but it makes sense now when we really see the person Marcus is here. We can infer now that he wanted to save Vi from being killed by Silco. However, he still used her, putting her in Stillwater prison and hiding her records to potentially use her against Silco in the future. But what I really love about Marcus is how complex and relatable he is. He doesn't want to do what he's doing. In fact, it's pretty clear that he's disgusted at himself for doing it, and for knowing that he could never live up to Grayson's name, but he can't stop. It appears he can't kill Silco without killing himself, and if he turns in the information he has on Silco, it incriminates himself. And in both cases, he loses his family. And as we've already seen from this previous scene, what is he shooting for? His family, his daughter. And he is going to do whatever it takes to not lose his daughter. So he's put in a really tough position. And I think we can all almost emphasize with him that, he is struggling in this position, because I think most people would struggle in this position that he's in. He knows he should do the right thing. He knows that many lives could be saved, and every death that happens because of Silco or Jinx is partly his fault. But he cannot bring himself to do the right thing, and it's this struggle that makes him such an interesting character. Vi circles Caitlyn, getting in close and pressing Caitlyn up against the wall with her arm, testing Caitlyn, even flirting with her in a way to see how Caitlyn feels about her. I think this is one of the first biggest signs that Vi is into Caitlyn, and the start of the two of them getting closer. We've seen many scenes before this emphasizing the differences between the two, and that is definitely going to come up later, but both of those scenes also act to show us more about these two characters as they get to learn about each other. And as Vi's leaving, she sees Caitlyn comfortably talking to one of the girls, which puts a smile on her face, probably remembering how uncomfortable Caitlyn was when she pushed a male to her earlier, and not expecting that she would adapt so quickly to this new unknown environment. But more importantly, I think it's the fact that she's comfortable with women that puts that smile on Vi's face that makes her think that she was right about Caitlyn's preferences. The Medardas only take from the world, and are not usually in a position to give anything back. Again, what I really like about Mel's character is how little we know about her, with little snippets of information like this coming through, and due to that, not knowing if we can trust her. And I really like how this scene is placed, purposefully right before Victor's scene, showing us the growing rift between the two and how Jayce has changed. While Jayce has become more concerned with protecting the Hex Tech and almost sacrificing his personal ambition, like Heimerdinger mentioned with Stanwyck Padidley in the last episode, Victor is working away in his lab, so focused on his work, shown by him not even noticing the feelings his assistant has for him, which is another point of comparison to Jayce, as right that moment, Jayce is currently with Mel. And this isn't even the first time. We can see back here in this scene that Victor is busy working on something, while Jayce seems to be fixing his tie in the mirror. Had this been the Jayce of Act 1, I'm sure he would be right next to Victor experimenting away. Vi is not used to having anyone save her, and I think this is the start of Vi really beginning to trust Caitlyn, and being able to rely on her in a way which she hasn't been able to do with anyone else before. Vi gives her a compliment, which seems unlike her character, especially after spending such a long time in prison, and this means something. She even asks Caitlyn to help her up, and this dialogue at the end as they walk away shows already how close the two have become, already thrown jokes off one another, which is a stark contrast to their dialogue at the start of the episode. And I just want to reiterate here, this is the reason why they didn't make us feel for Caitlyn in her flashback, like they did with Vi and Powder and Jayce. Caitlyn's actions of saving Vi not once, twice now, the prison and from Zavika, means something to us as the viewers, as we care for Vi by this point. The flashback didn't need to make us care for Caitlyn because she brought Vi back to us, and that makes us care for her. And now in the story, she's not only saved Vi again, but becoming closer to her. Certainly, if we didn't care for her as a character before, we definitely do now. And then lastly, we can see here that Jinx is in the zone. The water scene seemingly working as she is able to work away at her creations, like happy and not afraid of them like she was before. And it seems like in this moment she may understand what Vi said to her as a child. What you do that is different makes you special. She is owning this, and she is not walking the path Vi left for her, but her own. In this scene, she is in the zone where nothing else matters. Which is a really great build-up considering how this episode ends, with Silco finding out that Vi is alive, and this almost freedom that Jinx has achieved, finally from her memories, is about to be broken by the fact that her sister is there again. And in a way, things have almost flipped themselves in the head, because in the past, Powder had only good intentions and she ended up killing her family. And now I feel like Vi, again, almost has good intentions. She just wants to get Powder back, but just her presence being there, just Powder or Jinx finding out about her presence, could completely put her into disarray once again. The scenes in episode 5 really start to differ from the way they were presented to us in previous episodes. The scenes in this episode start to move more quickly than they have in previous episodes. This is partly to show the passage of time, but take the brothel scene for example. They didn't really need to split this into two scenes, and I don't think they really needed to show us where Powder was just because Vi mentions her. The answer really comes down to why are the scenes there and how can they be made interesting. Take the scene in episode 3 where Jayce and Victor are breaking into Heimerdinger's lab. It was a scene that needed to happen, but was made more interesting by including conflict, the conflict being Mel's appearance in the scene. In episode 5 there are a lot of scenes like this where certain things need to happen, but as there are so many of these scenes, it's hard to introduce any kind of conflict. Some scenes do have this in particular the ones with Caitlyn, but others like with Jayce do not, and instead act as foreshadowing. For example, all the scenes with Marcus are small, but each one we start to see him falter just a little bit more, like bit by bit. And this couldn't have been achieved if they just had a few long scenes with Marcus in. We needed to see Marcus at different points in different time, but we didn't really need a longer scene to achieve this in. And certainly if there had been other conflict within these scenes, it wouldn't have been as good. It would have just kind of been a bit jarring. I definitely think they could have worked the conflict into one or two of these scenes, linking it into other things in the episode, but not with the amount of scenes that they obviously wanted to include of Marcus struggling with his decision in the show. And I think this all leads into another reason why the scenes are like this, which is pacing. As I just mentioned a moment ago, I think it would have been fairly easy for them to make all of these scenes longer and give each one a kind of conflict that would make them more interesting. But then another issue would arise, and that would be the feeling that we are getting nowhere fast. Brandon Sanderson, a very popular fantasy author, states that when he has pacing issues, he looks at the promise he has made to his audience. One of the ways of tackling pacing is to make sure his audience is always progressing towards that promise that he's made. Currently that promise is Silco and Jinx, more specifically Vi and Jinx meeting up again, and the conflict between the Undercity and Piltover. But I would agree that the main promise of the episode is Vi and Jinx reuniting, or at least getting closer to each other. And the lesser promise would be the conflict between Piltover and the Undercity. If the scenes are long with conflict that is not really related to this promise, then the show will start to feel like it's dragging. And lastly is the number of point of view characters. This is not just increased, but unlike in episode 1, they can't concentrate a whole episode on a set of characters like they could before. So there are not only more point of view characters, but each one is getting their own time, slowing down the pacing and making our progression towards that promise much slower. This is why Arcane makes its scenes shorter, to move us towards that promise faster, and in a way that hides the fact that its pacing has slowed down. Changing scenes quickly can also make things more interesting. This is especially true in books. Again, going back to Sanderson, who uses this very technique not only in the climax of Oathbringer, one of his more recent books, but also in the start of Rhythm of War, to subdue the effects of slow pacing. And here is the character map for episode 5. As you can see, there are a lot more links than there were in the last episode. I've also brought back a few characters, Grayson in particular here, and the family, which just means Vander, Clagger, and Milo, because I feel like even just their memory becomes relevant to this diagram when realizing that Silco is the one that basically killed Vander and almost led the family to death, even though Jinx was the one who, killed them in the end. Having that link there really kind of just emphasizes the kind of person he is and what he's done and everything in the past. But if we get into this, I've put Grayson here, which Marcus feels responsible for her death. We can see that she was someone important to Caitlyn, and it was Silco that killed her. And we can start to see now that why Caitlyn is looking for Silco, because the whole reason, as I mentioned before, the whole reason may not just be because of this. She might just be trying to do this as a way of proving that she's not just a counsellor's daughter. But we can start to see this more clearly from these links. And with the amount of links now coming off Caitlyn, we can kind of see clearly from this diagram that she has become a more important character in the story, just by the number of links that are now coming off of her into different characters, and definitely more main characters in the story. So I find very interesting in this one is there's a lot more links going. If we cut the bottom of this, just above the Firelights and Jinx, to Undercity characters compared to Piltover characters, we can see there are a lot more links going up into Piltover now from the Undercity than there were originally in the last episode. We can see just from this diagram that there are more things happening in this episode that are linking both the Overcity and the Undercity together. And I think this was really emphasised in the episode by Caitlyn and Vi. Many scenes showing us the differences between those two characters, who literally come from, one from the Undercity and one from Piltover. Mel still in particularly is by herself, though now she has a stronger link to Jayce in this, but again, we still don't know anything else about Mel. Other than her being a counsellor, we really have not seen any other links from her to other characters in this show. I've also added Miss Young, who is the assistant to Jayce and Victor, and who has feelings for Victor. And even compared to Act 1, I think the complexity of this diagram really starts to show the amount of just different things that are happening to different characters within Arcane right now in Act 2, and how it's all expanding out and everything is kind of reaching into its climax. But anyway, that has been my analysis of episode 5 of Arcane. Hope you enjoyed that. If you made it this far, please don't hesitate to give me a like and subscribe so you know when the next episode's coming out. This has been That Stephen Rich. Thank you very much for watching, and I will see you in the next one.